Hi, welcome to the All of a Kind podcast. I'm Batya Wittenberg.
And I'm Merav Hoffman.
We loved these books when we were kids. We love them now, and we hope you do too.
Today's chapter is the one where Sarah dusts the front room.
In this week's chapter, Mama finds that dusting is one chore that her girls seldom do well or willingly. She comes up with a game to catch their interest, hiding buttons from her sewing box around the front room for her daughters to find as they dust. The reader follows Sarah through the first game, exploring the front room and its furnishings, finding all the buttons. And when each girl has had her turn, Mama changes things up. This formerly hated chore becomes a promise of possible fun.
I'm really excited. We have a guest today. We have Orit Friedman. Orit is one of my childhood friends. We grew up together and we talked about books a lot, about the Oz books, the All of a Kind family books, Archie comics, pretty much anything that you could put in front of us, we would talk about it and dissect it. So I'm going to let Orit give a little bio of herself.
Hi, I'm Orit Friedman. As Merav said, we grew up together in London, Ontario. I actually think it's very apropos that we're doing it this week because one of the things I remember about Merav's house was her Barbie dolls. Merav had the best vintage Barbie dolls you have ever seen in your life. No one else had Barbies like Merav, so we would play Barbie, which of course came out this week. I have not seen the movie yet, but I definitely do want to see it. And we would talk about books. So I was really, really excited when Merav and Batya asked me to be part of this. I now live in Toronto. I moved around a lot. I have 5 kids. Similar to All of a Kind family, but very different. None of them have the same names as All of a Kind family. I am a medical oncologist and I continue to read lots of books in my free time. I saw this book. I think I stole it from my sister who stole it from our childhood home. And then I saw recently that PJ Library had put it out again. And that was super exciting because then all sorts of new people were reading All of a Kind family again. I am really happy to be here.
We're really happy to have you. And in a weird coincidence, one of my friends does the PJ Library website, and it's not even a Jewish friend. So it's just kind of a weird, the universe is trying to tell us we should do this podcast.
All coming together.
It's funny that you bring up the Barbie dolls because with Barbie coming out, I've absolutely been thinking about those dolls a lot too. I think they wound up with one of my sisters, and we had 2 vintage Barbie dolls that had belonged to my aunts, and they were hand-me-downs. And we also had a couple of other Barbies that had kind of joined the crew. And I think at some point we inherited a Skipper doll, and we were kind of perplexed about how to dress Skipper because she wasn't shaped like Barbie, and all we had were Barbie clothes. But we did have the little vintage catalogs, which we love to look through for fashion inspiration. I also really remember playing paper dolls with Orit, which is going to come up next week when we do our episode where the girls go to Papa's shop. So there's a whole bit where they find a paper doll book. And we're about to do our features, what's on the page and what's not on the page. You might remember from last week that these were 2 features and they got so intertwined that we decided to combine them into one feature. What's on the page, what's not on the page. So it's time for what's on the page.
And what's not on the page. I don't think we meet anyone in this chapter that we haven't already met. It's Mama and the girls.
I would say we meet the apartment a little bit more because last time we sort of get that ramshackle, like, oh no, the library book is missing. Now we're about to formally meet the front room. So I feel like the apartment is a character, but I don't feel like it's a character in a traditional sense.
I agree. And I think we get to know a lot more about Mama from this chapter. We get introduced to her a little bit, but we see the brilliance of Mama in this chapter. I think what we don't see, which is really interesting to me that we didn't see in chapter 1 either, is Papa. Papa has yet to make an appearance. He'll make an appearance in chapter 3, but chapter 1 and 2 very much the girls and then Mama.
And we also get some of Mama's interior life in this chapter. Like we actually get Mama strategizing and Mama thinking.
Yes, we get that from her perspective. That's fascinating to me.
Yes, that's one of the wonderful things about the way these books are written is that they're semi-omniscient. And so you sort of have adult Sarah, who is Sydney, kind of looking back at her family and writing the semi-omniscient narrator of like what she assumed their motivations were. Perhaps she interviewed them. I don't know if she did that in isolation or not. It's something that I'm hoping that the more that we're in touch with the family, we will find out more about. And that's spoilers for later. So is there Judaism?
I didn't see any. I don't even remember when she's dusting if she particularly dusts anything Jewish. I think it's really this sense kids of a family that maybe is a little more wealthy than they actually are, to have a front room, to have a
Oh,
piano.
yes.
To me, it was very much that clearly mama has come from a background that has a lot more money than they have now. And here is this room that no one is allowed into except probably when they dust it or maybe when they have piano lessons. But clearly, this is a testament to mama's past, that she's someone who would have an important front room and would have a piano that you have to dust.
I think it's said in this chapter, it might be in the next chapter, that it's a 4-room apartment. And that means presumably the kitchen, the front room, there's no bathroom. They're presumably sharing a bathroom down the hall. And then we have the 2 bedrooms. So the front room has to be engaged at some point, but I think maybe only when we get guests. I'm assuming that dinner is getting eaten at the kitchen table, except possibly on Shabbat and during Chagim.
I was going to say, it was not clear to me yet which room they have their meals in. Is that a front room thing or is that a kitchen thing?
One of the things I thought was fascinating was the fact that when Sarah is dusting the chairs, and we'll get into that in a minute, there's only 5.
I absolutely thought that too. I thought, where are the kids supposed to be?
I didn't notice it. Right, how did I miss? There are 5 kids and 2 parents. That's not enough chairs.
At some point in the future, we get a mention of a Morris chair, which is not mentioned in this description of the room. So it's possible that that Morris chair is getting hauled in from somewhere when the kids need to sit, or it's possible that Charlotte and Gertie are going to bed before formal dinners. I think we'll have to look at that again closely when we get to the Shabbat chapter, because I haven't been reading ahead this time. So I'm like, oh, what happens? But what happens with their chairs? But yeah, there's only 5 chairs for adults. So either the kids are sitting 2 to a chair, which might be a thing. I found a period photo of a school, and the kids are actually sitting 2 to a chair because that was what conditions were like at the time. And that's in New York City. So it's possible they were sharing chairs, but more likely the youngest girls are not yet coming to formal events. Or possibly they're dragging kitchen chairs in.
But yeah, with all the stuff that we see get dusted, I do not believe that we see any. There's no Shabbos candlesticks getting dusted. There's no menorah. There's no Kiddush cup. And I think that goes back to Merav. You talked about this last time. This is, again, very subtly, we're going to introduce this as a family that could be any family at all, and only later are we going to get to specifically this is a Jewish family. And it's striking here because this is exactly where it would be so very easy to show something like the Shabbos candlesticks, and we don't see them.
You sort of think that Sydney was telling these stories to her daughter, and then she wrote them down, and then her husband gave them into a publishing company. And if she's just telling her daughter stories, then she wouldn't necessarily need to slowly introduce the concept of Judaism. But if she's writing it for a greater audience, then it certainly makes sense to slowly introduce the concept that these people are Jewish, and only later, once you fall in love with them, then kind of mention subtly, by the way, they also have a religion. But at this point, I agree, Batya, they could be any immigrant family in a tenement building.
It's very possible that the manuscript that was first handed in, we want to publish this, is not what eventually got published, that there were editing passes that changed the story from, here is a story I'm telling my daughter, and this is the version that we publish for everybody.
In fact, we do have some historical evidence in that direction, in that we know that Sydney Taylor went back and forth with her editor a bunch, and that one of the issues under contention was the amount of Judaism on the page in the early chapters. One thing I did think about while reading this chapter was the fact that it is a 4-room house. It is, I think it's described as being on the 2nd floor, and it's described as a house. It's not described as a tenement building, which is interesting because this is an area where we know, and we discussed this in the last episode, absolutely, people are cheek by jowl in these apartments. The fact that there's only 7 of them in the apartment is actually sort of unusual. It's not, and we have our aunt and uncle and we have our grandparents. There's no 3rd generation in the apartment. It's a unit. It's one family. So I think that points to what Orit was saying about sort of Mama's class status prior to moving to New York City, which we have confirmed in the From Sarah to Sydney biography. Which, Orit, I don't know if you've read this, but there's a biography that came out a few years ago, which sort of explains the origins of the books and kind of who Sydney Taylor was before she became Sydney Taylor, and covers her career with the Martha Graham Dance Company and all kinds of other cool stuff. But that actually kind of goes into the idea that Mama was upper class in German and Papa was lower class, and came to Germany for work and then met Mama, and Mama was like, who is that horrible man? I never want to see him again. And of course falls in love with him.
That's interesting because I thought that they had met before they moved.
It's fairly definite on the idea that Mama and Papa met in Germany and then they immigrated. And I think Ella was already born, which is interesting. And Henny
Yeah.
might have been born too. I can't remember, but Henny would have been very small when they immigrated.
It is interesting to think about which parts were true for Sydney Taylor, which parts were just her imagining, what she would have liked to have her life be like at that time. Because I agree with you, it would be so unusual to not be in a tenement building, even coming from a more wealthy family at that time in that area and the Lower East Side.
I mean, it might be that the use of house is the same use of house that I use. I say my house, but I mean the apartment that I live in, as opposed to an actual freestanding house. I live in a row house and I only own the top 2 floors of it. But that's still significantly a house as opposed to like a freestanding house like what we grew up in versus an apartment building versus a tenement where the tenement walls are very thin and you're kind of in an apartment with 10,000 people.
It does say, and this is fresh in my mind because I'd read just the next chapter because we're going to be recording that one next. It specifies, unlike most of the people in this area, their home isn't a tenement, and they seem to have some understanding that they're lucky in this, that they're fortunate.
It's possible that they swung some kind of favor. We don't get kind of what was the previous living situation before this apartment, at least not in this chapter. So it's possible that they were in a tenement and moved into a better situation. We certainly see them trade up several times over the course of the series.
And I think that we get the sense, as you were saying, Merav, that the house that they're in is almost like another character, that we really get the sense that there is this beautiful space where they could entertain guests and that Mama's put a lot of work into it with making doilies and having nice furniture and having the girls dust every day. So she clearly, she really loves this room.
I think the room is symbolic to Mama of her life. Like we are allowed to have nice things, even though we're living in poverty, even though we're making our living. Like we don't know exactly what they're making the living from, but it becomes clear that they make their living from junk. And so I think that kind of plays into the issue of Mama's pride in her family, whereas she knows that the reality is that we literally sell people, discarded items back to them so that they can have them. I mean, we didn't have the concept of recycling at this point. Possibly she finds that degrading. Possibly she sees this room as a kind of antidote.
I could see that. An antidote or a buffer between herself and her family and the rest of not so much the rest of the neighborhood in the sense that, like, she considers herself better than them, but in the sense of this is a kind of a harsh part of the world we're living in, and we don't have to succumb to that. We can keep our space nice.
Yes. And I think that the idea of having nice things is part of Mama's privilege, but it's also something she is ambitious for her girls.
Yes. You're right. It's not just antidote in that sense either. It's also its aspiration.
Exactly. So I think we covered sort of the character of the home. We've asked about Judaic culture. I really feel like the only rush we get with Judaic culture here is when she dusts the mantelpiece, it's kind of an among other things. So you could potentially go back and read into that the Shabbos candles are there, but it's not on the page. We then get into sort of the world. Is the world, in this chapter? And I would say kind of only implied. Like we've just talked about the idea of having guests come in, keeping the front room nice for guests. But outside of that, we just don't have, nobody else is in this chapter. It's not like, oh, Aunt so-and-so is coming. We have to have the front room nice. This is just the state of the front room.
Oh, the one other thing that implies the outer world in this is right the very start of the chapter, Mama tells Henny it's her turn to dust the front room, and Henny protests and tries to get out of it, and what she uses to try to get out of it is she's got to finish her homework.
Yes, so the pressure of school.
And she says, oh, well, I'll have a swell excuse when my teacher asks why I didn't finish my homework. I'll say my mother dug up all my time with dusting.
I think it was very funny that Henny says that she wants Ella to do it. And then Ella says she has something else to do. And then she doesn't go to Sarah. Like Sarah's the next person, the next girl, but instead she goes to Charlotte. So it's almost like she knows maybe Sarah would say no, or Sarah is too strong for that. But so she goes for the next target, who would not be Sarah. It would be Charlotte.
The implied sibling relationships that are not on the page exactly, but are definitely like, hey, I know you're not going to do this for me. So, Charlotte, honey, do you want to do my dusting? I really don't feel like we get a lot of cultural divide. As we talked a little bit about in terms of mama, the German versus Polish divide of, which immigrant generation were you? Although their parents immigrated simultaneously.
Nonetheless, there's still, that is a cultural divide, but you're right that it doesn't come much into this chapter because of how, what's the word? Internal is not the word I want, but it'll do. Because of how internal this chapter is, that it's all in the home and it's almost entirely in one room.
And also internal in the sense of thoughts, because it's almost entirely Sarah perspective, no dialogue after the initial exchanges.
So, because of that, there isn't really a lot of room for there to be much cultural or personal contrast. This is all very much one space for most of the chapter.
I think what I remember feeling when I read it as a kid, or else I'm just imagining that that's what I felt, is just how loving their mother was.
Yeah.
That Sarah, thinking back to this time, doesn't think, oh, my mom made us do all these chores. What a terrible person. She really appreciates that the mother gave them responsibility. And then she imagines this whole dialogue in her mother's mind about how to make things nicer for the kids in a time when you really didn't need to make things nice for anyone. It was, as I think one of you, maybe Merav, said on the last podcast, we find out that now it's 1912 and people could just make their kids do anything. And there was no thought about making things educational or fun or lovely for children. And yet, Mama had these pedagogical ideas of
Yes.
how to make things interesting for her kids. And Sarah really appreciated that.
I think the first bit we get in Mama's mind is her going, well, this always happens. They hate doing the dusting and they'll do it, but it will be done poorly and it will be done reluctantly. How can I change that? And she does not go for, I'll punish them till they do it right, which was so standard for how you raised kids. That was would have been almost any parents, and I think sadly today it's not entirely gone. The idea that the way you get kids to do things is you discipline them, you punish them. You don't necessarily spank them, but you say, all right, you don't get X privileges until you do your chores. I know of, I should say, so many families where the rule is you don't get this week's Wi-Fi password until you have done all your chores.
That is a similar level of gamification to kind of what Mama is doing here. It's like, all right, here is a method by which I will make this fun for you. Mama is definitely sort of reaching inward and being like, what would I have enjoyed? Like she doesn't say this on the page. What would I have wanted if I was a kid and I had to dust a big front room? One of the key things for me is Sarah goes and gets the stool, right? She is too small physically to reach everything that she is
Yeah.
expected to do. This is a huge amount of trust that Mama is giving these girls. In my family, we had similar like china objects that belonged to my grandmother. You did not pick up the china shepherdess. I mean, the equivalent of the china shepherdess. You did not pick up the candy bowl. You did not, even if you were lifting the lid, my grandmother would look over at you and kind of watch you silently as you carefully put the lid back. The amount of trust being extended to these girls to dust unsupervised every day and not break things that are precious to Mama, it's kind of
It
huge.
really is. And honestly, I hadn't thought of that. But yeah, Sarah is handling delicate things, little china figurines and seashells, stuff that you could break. And she's 8.
And there's no mention of, that time that Henny dropped something, or, Gertie isn't allowed to do this part because no, Mama trusts her
I
girls.
think it does say that Gertie is too young for this task, but Charlotte isn't, and she's 6.
Right, exactly. Like there's an awareness on Mama's part of her girls' capabilities. And I think that that's really interesting because she is judging it as like, okay, is this girl ready? Not necessarily on an age basis. Can she physically do the task?
And being too short to do the task doesn't mean you can't physically do it, it just means you need an assistive device like a step stool.
Exactly.
And as someone who was too short for a lot of things for most of her life, I appreciate that. This isn't, I'm going to motivate you by making something unpleasant or withholding something pleasant that will be a punishment or a reward for when you do the job. It's, I'm going to make the job itself interesting.
Exactly.
When you look at chapter 1, talking about the camaraderie of the girls, like that really came through as the theme of chapter 1. And the theme of chapter 2 is, to me, just how lovely Mama is with her girls, that no matter what, she's going to make the best of things. She's going to make their life as pleasant as it possibly can be, even with chores. I think that Sydney Taylor wanted us to know those things first and foremost from her childhood. Number one, her sisters were always with her. And then number two, her mom was always kind of in her corner.
Yeah, and that is sort of
Yeah.
persistent throughout their lives as a family, is that the sisters sort of remained together. They worked together at Camp Sedgwin. This is how I found out the All of a Kind family people were real people and not fiction. As somebody I knew had gone to Camp Sedgwin, and I was like, wait, they're real. But beyond that, they worked together as adults. Like, they actually spent time together as administrators, as counselors at this camp. So at least for 2 to 3 months out of the year, and then in planning stages throughout the year, they were working together as a team. And that's not something that a lot of siblings can do. So I think that the foundation that Mama gives them in working alone and working as a team really colors the rest of their lives. And that's why I think it's so significant in the book.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you can see that they really do each have their own personality. And despite that, they can still work together. And they can see that Henny has a bit of a fiery character, but she can still work with the rest of the girls.
Yes, Henny tends to be kind of the ringleader for trouble, but I get a little of that energy from Charlotte too. And I kind of love that. It's sort of a question of, will Gertie follow them, or will Gertie follow Sarah and Ella and sort of become studious and serious? But then you also see the fun sides of those characters. So it's never a one-dimensional, this is the stiff sister and she's always boring, nose stuck in a book. Everybody's interesting.
They're all loving descriptions. Like, Henny, as described by somebody who didn't like her, would not look like the Henny we see. I mean, you said that Henny's a troublemaker, Charlotte's a troublemaker. Charlotte makes trouble because she gets distracted. Henny makes trouble because she has opinions and she's going to make that everybody else's problem. I love both of them. And I love both of them because they're written by somebody who loved both of them.
Yes.
Those could have been such obnoxious characters if written from the point of view of somebody who didn't like them.
And from a metatextual point of view, her sisters are still alive when she's writing these books. She doesn't, of course,
Yeah.
intend them for public consumption, but she's telling these tales to Jo, which we do canonically have as a thing she did. And Jo is, her only child, and presumably is going to see her aunts, and is not going to say, Mama told me this terrible thing you did when we were children, right? Like, maybe she will, but like, that would be Jo's interpretation if Sarah is telling it, or Sydney at this point is telling it in a loving way. And it's unclear kind of what the first drafts look like. Maybe someday we'll get a chance to see Sydney Taylor's papers, and that would be very cool.
Wow.
I would be very excited. I have to go and see if any of them are online. I know that at the time that the biography was written, they were not online. They were in someone's, I want to say, basement. And I think it may have been Jo's. Jo is still alive. Jo, her daughter, and her daughter's partner is still alive. And it's made clear in the book that there was a lot of tension between Jo and Sydney when Jo got older, because Jo came out as a lesbian. But Jo and her partner are still both alive, and they occasionally give interviews. So it's very exciting to sort of have that as a background resource in their world. I wanted to bring up, because I thought of this because Orit was going to appear on the program, but I also thought of it because I always think of it because it's sort of a recurring theme in my life for a really weird reason. When Sarah enters the room, it reminded me of the scene in the Oz books where Dorothy, or I think it might actually be Tip, is presented by the Gnome King's array of ornaments and has to pick out, it's Dorothy, pick out
Tip
which
is
ones.
already Ozma by that time.
Right. Okay. So it is in book 3. So books 2 and 3 are mashed up in my brain because of the movie Return to Oz, and I have to go back and read the books for differentiation at some point. But Orit and I read the Oz books. I actually borrowed Orit's Oz books when we were children, and so I permanently associate Oz in my brain with Orit. And so when Sarah enters the room and sort of has the panoply of objects in front of her to dust, I had this moment of, oh, it's Dorothy entering the Gnome King's ornament collection. So I thought I would share that because Orit is here.
That is such a delightful connection. Yeah. Sarah is looking for buttons, not for enchanted people, but still there's I'm here by myself in this big room full of stuff, and I have things to find. Can I do
Exactly.
it?
And I mean, for those who haven't read the Oz books, Dorothy is in that situation because her friends have been transformed into ornaments, and she must find them and touch them and say the word Oz. And eventually, she works out how to game the system, but it takes a while. Sarah does not have a similar ally, but she does have Mama as her ally. And I think that if at any point Sarah had given up on her quest and been like, I can't find the buttons, Mama might have been disappointed, but she would have still been like, it's okay, Sarah, we're going to work through this together. So I do think she has an invisible ally in the form of Mama.
Orit, something you said before really struck me, that you described Mama's approach here as pedagogical. And I don't think I would have thought to apply that, but it absolutely is. And was Mama ever a teacher? Or is this purely on an amateur level being approaching this like a teacher?
I don't think we ever know that, to my knowledge, in the book, what she used to do or if she ever had a profession or what training she might have had. But we definitely get the sense that she finds her job as a mother to be really, really important, and she takes it very seriously.
Purely as a mother, she has the job of being a teacher of housekeeping to her daughters. And
Yeah, and responsibility.
both of my parents were teachers. My mother is sadly gone, my father is retired, but a lot of people in my family have been teachers, and so as soon as I hear the word pedagogical, something goes, yes, of course, that's exactly what's going on. That's how to retain the child's interest in a task they're finding boring, because as long as they're bored, they're not going to get it.
I mean, I think one of the reasons why All of a Kind family always resonated with me is that my father's family were all from the States, and probably came around the same time as All of a Kind family came, maybe a little bit earlier. Probably grew up in tenement type buildings at that time. So whenever I would read it, I would imagine that maybe my ancestors were similar to that. I did have a grandmother, Henny. The names were kind of similar. When I would go visit my grandmother in New York, she did have a room that was a very fancy room. Usually people were not in there. The couch was covered in plastic that you would sit on and get stuck to. And I guess at this time they didn't have plastic yet, so they couldn't have plastic in their front room, but if they could have had plastic, they would have, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Yes, this is definitely the furniture that the next generation inherited and had covered in plastic to preserve it.
Yes.
I did not have an Aunt Henny, but I did have a great Aunt Charlotte, and my mother's mother, Bubby Gitzel, was Gertrude. I don't know if she was called Gertie as a kid, but it's very likely. They were not in New York; they were in St. Louis. But this front room, as described, very much brings up images of my Bubby's front room when I was little, including the china figurine on the mantel. I've been remembering more, I don't think it was a shepherdess, but it was definitely a little woman with big sweeping skirts, and I think she had a little fur muff, very much in the same style as this. You gotta have a china figurine of a lady with just the most improbable skirts for the room to be properly
My
decorated.
my bubby also had I think they were dancers. There was a mixed pair. I think it was like 17th century style with the giant skirt, and he was in little knee breeches, as I recall, and we were not allowed to touch those.
Ah,
My other grandmother, my baba, had the plastic, whereas Bubby would just redo her front room every 10 years. So that, I think, kept the plastic away.
Now, I don't know how many kids' books you guys still read. I have 5 kids. I have 2 stepkids who are 30, and now my other daughter just turned 18 today, and I have a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old. And I remember when I was reading them books, what always struck me in the books and in sitcoms is that the parents are idiots. In modern books and modern sitcoms, the parents have no clue. The kids are kind of gaming the system, they're fooling their parents. They're such secondary characters. They're almost not even a real character. What I love about this book, which was written so long ago, is that both of the parents end up really having their own personality. They're totally loving their kids, they're their allies. And it makes you wonder when that stopped. Like when we stopped having parents being these loving, accepting people, and we started seeing them as being kind of ridiculous people to fool.
I would say probably the 70s, because one of my other favorite children's books is The Westing Game. And while the parents are absolutely characters in The Westing Game, they are sort of the lampoon of the story, right? That could do an entire other podcast about the Westing game. But effectively, it's the kids that are smart. And I think the idea of the kids, as invoking like the war between the pitiful teachers and the splendid kids, which is another
Oh,
favorite of mine from
yes.
childhood, which Batya also read. There's just that idea that like, well, the authorities are stupid. And I think this maybe comes out of that period where the parents were always right. And then if you didn't have a good relationship with your parents, you kind of were contentious between, your relationship with your peers and then sort of the relationship you had with your parents was like at a different level and you fought against it. And I agree with you that I would love to see a return to the wise parent. Not every parent is a wise parent, but I do think that we get a lot out of having good adult role models in Jewish books that aren't the prophet Elijah.
Yes. A lot of the children's books that I read and have always read are fantasy adventure sorts of things. And in that sort of context, when the child character is going to be a hero, there really can't, or it's very difficult at least, to have there be competent, helpful adults who are allies, because a competent, helpful adult would prevent a kid from getting into that kind of situation, would shield them from it. Because no, you do not, in fact, want a 10-year-old having to face the incarnation of evil with only, I don't know, a talking book and a magic sword or whatever it is the kid happens to have. You need adults to be either actively an impediment or out of the way in that kind of book. But in a much more, what's the word I want? In a mundane setting where the only thing that the kid has to deal with is the real world, I feel you can, in fact, much more easily have adults who are allies, whether they are the kid's parents or teachers or mentors in some way. It's easier to do that when the stakes are different, when the setting is different. But it's also true, as you say, that there just isn't as much of it.
I'm going to raise for contrast The Dark is Rising, which I'm sure some of our listeners are like, but Dark is Rising, because you do have competent adults. And even if they don't always know what's going on, I mean, you have Merriman and you have the lady, and we have all of the people who sort of push Will. And if you haven't read the Dark is Rising books, they're great. They are not Jewish, just so you know, spoiler.
So good.
But we definitely have competent adults there. For contrast, when you say like a mundane book where there's no magic, we have Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil Frankweiler, where the parents are absolutely out of the picture and have kind of been duped because the kids have gone off to this museum and now they're living in the museum. But you do kind of eventually get a competent adult figure who they basically go to for reference when they discover a mystery. And she sort of guides them back to the life of normalcy that they had previously had while giving them the magic to sort of to keep when they go home. So I feel like that exists as well, even sort of counter examples in the genre. And the author of Mixed Up Files is Jewish, or was Jewish.
I'm thinking now also the other books that you and I were talking about in the last session, Merav. We brought in the Little House books and we brought in, what was the other one?
Cheaper by the dozen.
Yes, and those are both family books, very much. And likewise in those, the parents are characters, definitely allies to the kids, not obstacles to get around. Neither antagonists nor useless, nor, as you say, just people to dupe so you can get to do what you actually want to do.
And I think a lot of it is investment. And you're reading more thoroughly into the world of, I don't know if I would say kids' books still, but teen books. And I think that that's the world that Batya and I have not been exploring as thoroughly. So do you have examples from like the last 20 years? Because I'm feeling like all of our examples are like 30 and 40 years old.
I really think that a lot of modern movies, sitcoms, books don't see parents as much as a person or a character, but more a caricature. I remember reading to my kids, there was a series called The Puppy Place, and I loved that series. It was each about a dog and about how the boy and the girl would take care of the dog, but they knew that they couldn't keep that particular dog. You would learn about the breed, and the parents were very involved, and the parents were helpful and thoughtful, and the kids looked up to their parents. And it was just rare to see books where the kids really had a good relationship with their parents, where they looked up to them. I think the books I was reading with All of a Kind family, like enmeshed in my brain, is also 10 and a Kid. I don't know if you guys talked about that book, but
I never read those.
oh, on our bookshelf, it was like All of a Kind family right next to 10 and a Kid.
Yes.
And there, I remember that the parents are more involved as well. It's a little more in your face Jewishness than All of a Kind family is. I think All of a Kind family is very, at the beginning, very subtly Jewish, and then they introduced Judaism just really as part of their daily life, not as this is, going to be about a Jewish family. Just this is a family and they happen to also have Judaism.
Yeah, agreed. And I absolutely loved 10 and a Kid. I don't know if it's in print these days.
I think you had another example,
I was
Batya.
going to bring up Inkheart. It's the first book in, I want to say, a trilogy, and it's been a long time since I reread them. But Inkheart it's children's fantasy, and it's very much a story in which our protagonist girl's father is an active character in her life and an ally. And for contrast, I was going to bring up A Series of Unfortunate Events, which is also very Jewish, just incidentally, and in which there are adults actively trying to help and being prevented at every turn. There are adults who are really, really not trying to help because they don't care, and there are adults who are actively antagonists. We have pretty much the entire spectrum of possible ways that adults can not be helpful.
I think one of the things that's distinguishing All of a Kind Family from Series of Unfortunate Events, other than time, because they were written in vastly different time periods, there are two things. One is that even though we're only 2 chapters in, we've already seen the girls have friends. We have context outside of the girls. There's school, there's Tilly, there's the library. The girls are not in a world where there are no other children. And I think that the Baudelaire kids in Series of Unfortunate Events absolutely are kind of in a world with no other children.
For some of the books, yes. For others, there's other kids, but a lot of the books, they're the only kids around.
They've been plonked into an orphanage, or there's some situation where suddenly there are other children. But I feel like the adults who are working to help them are almost never on the page with the kids. And I think that the contrast is that in All of a Kind Family, the adults are omnipresent. Even when they're transferring from adult to adult, as in chapter 1, where they're transferring from their mother's authority into the librarian's authority, they're conscious of having to sort of adult themselves all the way to the library. And Sarah goes into the room to dust, and she is now sort of adulting herself. I must do an adult task. I must dust. And so she's sort of comporting herself properly. There's that one moment of weakness. She's like, oh, should I dust the rest of it? Because I already dusted it and I already found one button. Is it worthwhile for me to dust the rest? No, I must be responsible and dust the rest of it. And she's rewarded with the second button because Mama has psychologically anticipated her. And I love
One
that.
thing I love about that bit also is that Sarah is simultaneously thinking, oh, no, I've got to be responsible and do a good job. I shouldn't cut corners just because I'm pretty sure I found all the buttons that are there. But also, Mama might have anticipated that I would think this and be trying to catch me out.
Right? She's actually actively thinking, my mom is smarter than me. I better not try to second guess my mom.
Yes, that's another really important thing I think in this series across the board. At no point do any of the kids feel like or express an opinion that grown-ups are stupid.
I do think that Mama is very much an ally. I think it's interesting because Merav, you were saying offline before we started the recording that this chapter is a very internal chapter. It all takes place in the house. It's really, really in one room. Whereas the first chapter was very external and about the children's relationship with someone externally. And probably originally the author, if they really moved from Germany, the mother might not have actually had very much English, and the kids might have had much better English than the mother did. Sometimes we see in situations like that the children will have a relationship with the outside world, the mother won't, and in some ways, the children feel superior to the mother because they have this ability to communicate with the outside world. But we don't get that sense at all from how Sarah, talks about her mother or how the mother is portrayed in this book. You don't get a sense that the mother speaks any other language. Maybe she didn't. Maybe she did speak English. But you certainly get the sense that the children very much respect their mother at all times.
The only thing I can think of, and I do have a story about Celia in English, which I will tell in a minute, is there's a bit later in the books where one of the girls, and it's internal, she's thinking about how her mother's figure is still good, right? There's this bit where she talks about how other women, she sort of fat shames other women. Other women look like lumpy mattresses tied in the middle, and my mother looks great and upright, and she sort of admires her mother's like carriage and bearing. But what we do know historically about Celia Brenner is that she actually came to the States before Morris does. Morris is the father, Celia is the mother. So Mama actually takes a job in the States as a nanny, and she actually has a series of expensive jobs, which don't go well. And then she winds up working, I want to say, in a garment factory. And then she eventually comes back to Germany to marry Morris. There's a whole little drama of basically her sister-in-law sort of tricking her and making it look like she's a fallen woman. And Morris is like, I don't believe that about my Sealy. And she then comes back to like vindicate herself because she's taking all of these low rent jobs. And her sister-in-law, meanwhile, is like, but you should marry my niece. And Morris is like, I'm not having this. I was engaged to a perfect woman and I will stay engaged to my perfect woman. And she's going to come back for me. And she does, which is such an opposite narrative of all the narratives in my family where like the man goes away and he doesn't come back for a long time and the women wait. This is the opposite. I think that says a lot about Mama's character, is
Yeah.
that she wanted to see America before her family actually gets there. So she goes back to Germany, marries Morris, they have Ella. And then I think it's not until she's either pregnant with or just has had Henny that they come back. So presumably at some point she had good English, like to start
I
with.
feel like from other members of the family of Mama and Papa's generation, we do get a less polished English from them. But I don't recall seeing that from Papa, and we definitely, Mama talks like, or at least as represented in the book, if not like English is her first language, then definitely like she has got native degree fluency. As far as I can remember, we never see her talk in Yiddish inflected English, and we sentence structure that sounds like Yiddish. We don't get that from her that I can recall, and we do get it from other members of the family, I think.
This may be because Mama was reading Shakespeare. Like, quite literally, the girls speak about in their memoirs that Mama was a big Shakespeare fan and she made them read all the plays. And by the time we get to the next chapter, we'll see that there's like a high degree of literacy in this family. Ella is 12 and she's like, oh, here's some Dickens I haven't read.
Yes.
Are you telling me that you've read the entire Dickens canon already? You're
So, yeah,
12.
it seems likely that they have that degree of literacy, both from their mama in the sense that they resemble her, and in the sense that she would have been deliberately trying to inculcate, is that the word I mean? To instill.
Yeah, I
That's
think
to
so.
instill
To
them
instill or to
with that
foster.
kind of interest in and love for reading, and it definitely works.
Morris apparently was a math person, and Ella remembers him helping her with her math homework for algebra when she was in high school, even though he didn't have a full high school education himself. So that's pretty interesting too. And Orit, I haven't sent you this, but I sent Batya recently this paper cut that Morris did for his bar mitzvah, and it is astonishing. I will try to figure out a way to put that in the show notes.
And it's interesting in retrospect because when I read the books as a kid, I did not realize that it was a little bit autobiographical for Sydney Taylor. But in retrospect, looking at chapter 1 and 2 that really have Sarah front and center, you can see how she would really focus on her perspective as Sarah in those stories. So even though those stories included all of the other kids, Sarah is really the main character in both stories, and her emotions are emotions that Sydney, who is Sarah, would remember.
I do kind of want to keep account as we go how many chapters we get that focus specifically from one daughter's perspective, and if there really are more from Sarah than the others, because I can't say I noticed that reading them as a kid, and I definitely do remember that we have upcoming chapters in this book or later books from Charlotte and or Gertie's perspective, from Henny's, from Ella's. I'm pretty sure we get one from Charlie's in like the last book, maybe one or two. So she doesn't stick to just her own remembered perspective as young Sarah growing up.
Well, I was just going to say it would have been it would have been easy for her to write the whole book from her perspective, but she chose not to do that. So that's really interesting too. It's an interesting choice.
Yeah.
It is. And I didn't get the impression either that it was about Sarah so much as that Sarah happened to be featured in the first two chapters because that's where the dusting rotation is. Because, you know, when you're a kid, you just kind of accept what you're given. And you're like, okay, this is how the book is. You don't do literary analysis of any kind. You're just kind of like, okay, well, this is the next chapter in the book.
Same.
And I would say, I don't think we've talked about it yet, but I really do love the illustrations in this book. And
Yes.
just the girls seem so real and sweet and exactly how I would imagine it in my brain, of course, because I only ever read it with these pictures. So they're just exactly enmeshed to the point that I looked up the illustrator, but I couldn't find anything else by them. Maybe Merav or Batya, you know more about the illustrator, but they didn't even illustrate subsequent books.
I don't.
It was just this first one.
Yeah, I think we're going to be doing a deep dive at some point to talk about the illustrations because The first book really just has that wonderful layout with all of these flowing illustrations. And hopefully, at some point, we're going to do a cover and illustration episode to just kind of talk about the art of All of a Kind Family, which varies wildly. When Batya and I were starting to look up the covers, we found some that looked like Nancy Drew novels,
Yes.
where people are like in an open carriage, singing. And I'm like, what? Oh, that's that scene where Grace is in the carriage from much later on in the books. They picked something, very vivid to illustrate, but it definitely doesn't feel Jewish to me. The covers, I think, never were strongly Jewish, but like I'm looking at it and I'm like, wow, that's such a Nancy Drew looking, or like a Cherry Ames.
Extremely, extremely white, yes.
Yes, very white.
And there's cover illustrations that look, if not exactly like photos, then certainly almost photorealistic. And there are some that are more almost scribbly. There's just this immense, immense variety of cover illustrations. And I love that. I don't think there's a single book series that I'm fond of that hasn't had like 5 or 6 different sets of color cover illustrations.
And I remember really liking in the book itself, there were some illustrations, but not a lot of illustrations. So you
Yeah,
felt,
not on every
yeah,
page.
you didn't feel like you were reading a kid's, a little kid's book, but you got enough illustrations to get the picture of what's going on.
Exactly. And there were certain ones that were just really resonant for me, like all of them sitting around the dining room table, or like when they're in the penny candy store. And we're getting ahead of ourselves for chapters, but
Oh
like
yeah.
that's definitely for me sort of the visual component, because at the time that I read them in the 70s and the 80s, right? Like that's a world far removed from my own,
Hmm.
right? So to be able to picture kind of what they're wearing and what they're doing and how that looks, I think that that was there to give us an impression of like what was real life like for them on a day-to-day
I
basis.
agree. I think that the illustrations really added to the whole picture of what was going on, and they had just enough illustrations, not too many, not too few for the book.
Just a little sprinkling.
Yeah, there's a greater sense of, I guess, immersion that the text alone is not going to give us. I'm remembering again a chapter that we haven't got to yet, but it is in this book, of the open air market where they do shopping. They all go shopping together at one point, and it's just such there's just one drawing that is so detailed and broad, and we're seeing a whole street.
And in fact, it's that I chose to use for the website, not the drawing, because the drawing is copyrighted. But I went into the archives at Library of Congress and found an actual photo of one of the streets near where they lived and of the market there. And it was actually in color. And I was like, is this colorized? And no, the answer is it was actually color stock. I've actually faded it down for the website because I wanted to be able to sort of have text against it. But the actual photo is astonishing because not only do you have the whole street scene, you also have people standing out on their balconies. So there's like multiple levels visually of things that are going on because it's a tapering street and it sort of rises in a V shape. And so the further back you go, the more detail is crammed into every inch of the
Wow.
picture.
I really like. I understand that you cannot have street markets and cars sharing the same street, but I really do feel like the loss of the street market was a terrible, terrible
So
loss to this city, and it's a real shame it's
come to my
gone.
neighborhood on a Monday.
I love your neighborhood on a Monday when they have just that little street market area, but they used to be so much
They did.
bigger.
And it used to be more that like an established shop. This is one of the things that happens in local street fairs now is every restaurant and shop around our house suddenly has a cart in front of it as if, the old days are back and they're serving food from the cart or they're selling merchandise from the cart. And it's actually kind of cool because I kind of get that moment of like, oh, it's like All of a Kind Family. Now, of course, none of the food is kosher, but like there's a certain amount of like just visceral joy of like, I smell food in the air. I can buy goods on the street. I can see my neighbors. And to have that every day is actually kind of a fun privilege in a world where you're kind of cramped into a little tenement world. To have the expansive street is it's kind of a
And we
gift.
won't get too political about hechsher's, but of course, at the time of All of a Kind Family, things didn't have hechsher's either, except for maybe the meat. They just
That
knew
wasn't a
what
thing,
the
yeah.
ingredients were and they
Mhm.
were able to eat it.
Yeah, there's that bit later in, I think it's like book 3 or 4, where Ella is like very happily koshering a chicken in the kitchen. And Grace is like, oh no, what are you doing? Right. And, she has to explain koshering.
That's way too much salt. Oh, we're gonna wash it off.
they're so excited about that penny.
Yeah, let's talk about the reward factor.
And yeah, the way Mama changes up the game, as you get 1 week where she hides the same amount of buttons for each kid. We're not going to do this all the time now, but you'll never know when you go into dust whether there's going to be buttons or not, or how many there's going to be. And then it says 1 week, every day Mama hid buttons and a penny.
And the penny is
The
magical.
penny is so magical.
That's twice your wealth for the day, right? You have your penny that you're guaranteed because you've been a good girl, and now you have your penny you found magically while dusting. And it's interesting because, like, what's not mentioned is what happens if a girl never, like, doesn't find all the buttons. Does Mama just send her back into the room to keep cleaning? Because we see the discipline aspect of the relationship when we get to the soup chapter, which we'll talk about in a future
the
episode.
soup chapter makes me sad.
Oh, me too.
Yeah.
I feel like there's going to be like a shared collective trauma when we get to the soup chapter.
Oh, yes. For sure.
But ultimately, I think that Mama is strict but fair. I mean, I do think she would send someone in to, like, have their 3 tries at finding the button again. And then she'd be like, okay, sweetie, like, now you go away and I'm going to find the magic hiding place. I think maybe Mama realizes her capability to be clever and her girl's capability to be thorough isn't always equally matched. So I wonder if that ever happened. And that's, I guess, a mystery for the ages.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting she doesn't talk about that at all. And it might be because if they didn't find all the buttons, it wasn't a big deal. She didn't shame the children if they didn't find the buttons. She didn't punish them. It was just part of how she made dusting more enjoyable and taught them how to take pride in their work. And they didn't have any bad associations with it. Maybe she never even told them they didn't find the buttons. They did the best job that they could.
I kind of feel bad for Mama because she had to keep track, right? Like, did she make a note in her book to say, 10 buttons hidden, piano, under the doily? Like, was she literally keeping track every day in her brain? How was Mama doing this?
I gotta tell you, when we do Bedikat Chometz every year, and for those listening who don't know what this is, it's a thing you do the night before the beginning of Pesach, of Passover, where you ritually hide bits of leavened bread around the house, and somebody, ideally not the person who did the hiding, has to go around the house and find them. Generally, in my house, I'm the one who hides, and my husband is the one who finds, just because it works out easier that way. I will not remember where I put them unless I write them down. There's 3 in this room, they're in this place. There's 2 in this room, they're in this place and this place. And the way we keep it from being, too predictable is I don't tell him, and I think I may have got this idea actually from this book, and I just never put that together. I tell him there's going to be between 9 and 12 pieces all over the apartment, and so I'm not going to tell you when you're done. You tell me when you think you're done, because otherwise, okay, well, I found all 9, so I don't have to keep
right,
looking.
Exactly. That's actually, you probably did at least get the game theory.
I must have gotten it from this chapter. I didn't think of it. So yeah, I don't know if Mama wrote down where she put it or if she just had a better memory than me and remembered.
Or maybe she was doing it off the color patterning or the size, but somehow Mama was keeping track.
Oh, wow.
Especially when you're doing something random, like, all right, I did 3 big ones and 3 little ones and 4 irregularly shaped ones. So when they hand them in, that's what I should be looking for. And of course, they get to keep the penny. And if they don't find the penny, well, then I guess Mama keeps the penny.
Yes. But you can bet, even though this is not talked about further, you can bet that when the first girl who did the dusting that week found the penny, everybody's going, am I going to get a penny when it's my day?
Oh, no doubt.
And they were not going to stop searching that room until they found it.
It must be clean by now. I haven't found a penny. I mean, this has just been a real delight to have Orit here and to have Orit and Batya in the same place for the first time ever. So I hope this is something we get to do again someday.
I'd be glad to have met.
I hope so too. Batya actually said to me last week after we cut off, she's like, do you think we can hang out with Orit again? So, sure. Yeah.
I would like to.
I mean, given that we were very nearly childhood friends, I feel like we have time to make up for.
So I think that's our chapter for today. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Batya Wittenberg.
And I'm Merav Hoffman. We're really glad you're here.
Be sure to join us next time when we'll hear Charlotte say, why don't we all go down to Papa's shop? I bet there'll be a lot of peddlers today there because it's raining. Our opening theme music is the public domain Dill Pickle Rag, performed here by Arthur Pryor's band, courtesy of the Internet Archive. Our closing theme music is the La Sirène Waltz, also in the public domain, written by Pietro Dero, performed here by Daniel Gunderson and Sonny Larson. All of a Kind Podcast's logo is by Al Benbow. Please see our full production credits on our website at allofakindpodcast.com.